Hi guys. How y'all doing? So for this week, the topic I'll be talking about and you all be learning about is household mental illness. For the purpose of this class, what that means is what's the impact a parent or caretaker's mental health has on their child. Um, as you'll see in some of this week's materials, this can lead to adverse childhood experiences. Children from these households are more likely to experience mental health disorders themselves. Families as a whole can be more dysfunctional, which puts the children at risk for a lot of things. So some of the materials specifically talk about that. They also talk about successful interventions to help these families, and I'll be providing another link to some more information about preventative and treatment options. Some of which just include things like, therapy for the child and the parent, really cultivating a sense of love between the child and the mentally ill parent, providing context and knowledge about the parent's mental illness to the child so they're not blaming themselves. So I'll let you read about that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of information out there on what these households can do in these situations. And that's great. However, I think the root of this problem goes beyond just the household. I remember Professor Yael talking about the early studies done on adverse childhood experiences and how one of the criticisms on it was that the scope of these studies were too narrow, meaning that all the focus is happening inside the house rather than looking at the social conditions that greatly impact these households. It's unfair to put all the responsibility on these already vulnerable families when a large part of the issue is created by other social factors. So in kind of thinking about that and zooming out, I think of two things. One is stigma around mental health, and two, access to mental health. So there's this great podcast episode in the materials from a show called Amani State of Mind. These two women, one who is a therapist, talk about mental health and how it's been stigmatized in their lives, and also bring up this idea of access. They're both Black women and expressed how therapy to them always seemed like this rich white person thing, and how it had to be this really dry, clinical, serious endeavor. And they felt there wasn't a space for them. And they go on and say how vital it's been for them to find spaces where people look like them in their own healing journeys. So definitely check that out. I really enjoyed that. And I'll also be providing a link to a TED Talk with this artist named Matilda. She's also a mental health advocate from Stockholm, and that's what a lot of her art is. And she gives this brilliant talk that reframes mental health from an individual problem and reframes it as a social one. So if you remember from last semester, we learned about the social model of disability. This is the same lens she's providing for mental health. And she kind of sums up this idea from a quote I'll share for you from the talk. She says, "Am I a failure, or have I been failed by a society that is not accessible by those with chronic mental illnesses?" So check that out. I think you'll enjoy it. So yeah, coming out of this week, this one big idea I really came away with. I was really moved by this power of personal narrative. An issue like mental illness can be so complex and vary from individual to individual, that getting to hear the stories, the lives, all the different ways the problems and solutions can express themselves really helps create a more diverse understanding of this issue. Personal narrative helps humanize this very human problem. So just like the podcast I mentioned said, therapy, mental health can feel, dry and clinical. These stories help transform mental health into something more than something you do to get better and into something you do to thrive. So yeah, for this week, um, I really wanted to think about personal narrative in general, accessibility, and stigma. So I know a lot of you have spoken about the importance of mental health in your own lives. And in my experience, I've always been in the minority of people who care and find this work interesting. So, I'm curious, what normalized mental health for you, or what made it accessible, or what's making it unaccessible, or how is it still stigmatized? And I'm also a big media person, meaning I love art, movies, shows, whatever. This is the content era. So a lot of times in my own life, when I've struggled to find people to talk to about these things, I've turned to media. So I would love to know what kind of things have helped or influenced you in normalizing mental health. Could be anything. Like I think about shows like BoJack Horseman, or I saw this documentary called Minding the Gap, anything at all. And yeah, lastly, if you don't want to do any of that, totally fine. Just, I would love to hear any thoughts you had from anything that struck you in this week's materials. So yeah, I look forward to seeing everyone's responses, and I will see you in the discussion posts. Take care.